I've come to tell you about scaling. And I know that here we're kind of right in the center of the IT of Eastern Europe, and particularly of telecom. I just learned this morning. Lots and lots of telecom companies here. So I'm an old Bell Labs person. And of course, when I joined the company, it was big on the 11th of June, 1979. How big, you ask? How many employees did AT&T have? 1 million. Pretty big company. So, I mean, everything they did big. This was a company of scale. And it's kind of odd because AT&T was a company where Unix came from. And Unix is the one that popularized the phrase, small is beautiful. So we had small tools, a small operating system, small languages, and things like this. And the Agile wave kind of rode that. We had small teams, autonomous teams. But now the old guard is back. IT is prosperous. There's a lot of money. If you're a manager and you have money, what do? Well, you hire people. Then no one can blame you for any problems that come up. Oh, you know, I have 20 more testers. You know, you can't blame me. I did everything and spent money on testing. Or they'll hire more developers, and then you can't blame me on schedule. Well, we know that, you know, every person you add to a team detracts from the productivity of everyone on the team by about 20% for 6 months. And that if you add a team to some development, that also is going to add to the drag. And I mean, if you scale up, we know that going from 5 people and adding people detracts from your effectiveness. And in fact, even just to break even, you have to double the size of the original staff. So I have yet to see one study that shows that scaling has value. But it's driven by this management hunger to avoid blame and this belief in kind of the old world model that we're still building pyramids. And the more people we have moving blocks up the pyramid, the faster it is we're going to be able to build it. But intellectual endeavors don't work that way. Even some physical endeavors don't work that way. 1 or 2 people can sort a deck of cards very fast. 52 people cannot sort a deck of cards very fast. And this is the way intellectual endeavors work. So, nonetheless, scaling has kind of gotten the interest of the industry. And I think this is because the people who spend money for trainers or consultants like me to come in are managers. Developers don't have, you know, training budget, right? How many of you here are managers and are willing to admit it? Come on, hands up high. Really? No, just a couple? All right, well, if you're truthful, then this is a good audience. This is good people. But, well, it's a bad audience because I'm talking to the wrong people, right? I mean, your manager should be here. Now, there is a place for increasing the scope of your Scrum development. And if you have a product that you're building here in Romania and you have a version you're selling in Germany, maybe you need to have German language localization. So, I mean, you don't want a German-speaking team here. I mean, you want it working with the clients to be able to, you know, breathe the same air, drink the same water, understand the culture, understand the local tax laws, other laws that may influence how your product works. And so you may have additional teams for reasons like this, or for different market segments. So this need for growing really hasn't gone away. So it's not about adding capacity to be able to do things faster. But so it sounds like the network connection is coming and going, or is my battery dying here? Which of these? There it is. For a second. I wonder if my phone is getting in the way. Let me get rid of my phone here. All right, let's see if that makes it sound better. So I'm going to talk about how you should approach scaling and contrast it with what is on the market today. Because there are these commercial frameworks like like SAFe and Scrum at Scale. I mean, Scrum has clearly won the Agile wars. And, you know, I'm a big believer in Scrum as being the journey you should take on the way to excellence. The goal is not to do Scrum, but the goal is to use Scrum to get there. So people see it sells. You know, Scrum sells, Sex sells, so it's got to look like Scrum. So, and Agile sells. So, I mean, we have things like the Scaled Agile framework, which has absolutely nothing to do with Scrum and absolutely nothing to do with Agile. But it's marketed that way because Sex sells. And it's managers who don't know any better who are buying it. But it's just a relabeling of standard command and control product management techniques with Scrum lingo so people buy it. And Scrum at Scale isn't really Scrum either. I mean, Jeff Sutherland himself, the inventor of Scrum, says so. He says Scrum is for a single team. Well, let me tell you about Scrum at Scale. So then managers can say, ooh, I'm doing what Jeff Sutherland wants us to do. I'm using Scrum at Scale, you know. So these things don't work. And I want you to understand why they don't work. So this is a picture from some of the Scrum at Scale literature. So this comes largely from a company called Scrum Inc. And they're selling this idea of having an organization where I'm going to structure my Scrum teams in a hierarchy. And so each one of these itty-bitty little orange spots is a person. So here's a Scrum team with 5 people. 5 Scrum teams are organized around something that they call a Scrum of Scrums. And then there are 5 of these Scrum of Scrums organized around something called a Scrum of Scrums. No, I'm not making this up. And this is a Scrum of Scrums. And there's a product owner, and there's a chief product owner, and there's a chief product owner, and a chief. No, I'm not making this up. So what is this? This is standard 19th century German Bismarck army hierarchy. And so, wow, we're really back to the future here, and you know, we've restored command and control. But because they use the word product owner, and they don't own anything, we say, wow, this is Agile, you know, so this must be cool. So what's the problem with this? So what is Agile? If there's one word that characterizes Agile, or maybe 2 words, what would they be? Anyone want to take a shot at this? What is Agile? Fast? The word fast and speed do not appear once in the Agile manifesto. This is not about speed. Anyone else want to take another try?
Incremental delivery.
What?
Incremental delivery.
Yeah, but I can do that without being Agile. What is key to Agile that aids incremental delivery? Or why are we doing incremental delivery? What? Okay, one more time. This is getting closer. So if we look at nature and what's caused nature to survive, I mean, why didn't the dinosaurs go extinct? It's because they were able to adapt through evolution. So if we look at the Agile Manifesto, all of Agile is about self-organization and feedback that allows teams to adapt to change. This is what Agile is about. It's all about adaptation. So in order to self-organize, you need to have people with very, very short feedback loops between them. So if this is an Agile organization, it's a Scrum organization, let's say you're a person here and you need to coordinate with a person over here. I mean, they're all the same product, and we're going to be Agile, we're going to adapt, and if our parts of the system depend on each other, we need to communicate in order to adapt how our parts of the system interact. Well, how many legs of communication are there? Well, this person could just go over there. Oh, no. The chief product owner and the chief product owner are going to say, you left us out of the loop. And we need to be in the loop to be able to control these things. So what do you need to do? You need to go to your boss and go to the product owner and go to the chief product owner, who goes to the chief product owner, who comes back down. How many legs of communication are there in an organization like this of 625 people? Too many. It's about 7. So the average is between 6 and 7, and the maximum is 7. How many of you know small world theory? So I mean, if you make a list of your friends, and I make a list of my friends, there's some chance that the same person will be on both lists. And if they're not on that list, then we go to the next level. Each one of those people make a list of their friends. And there are some theories, actually substantiated by some studies, that show that any 2 people on Earth are connected by no more than 6 connections. So small world theory and self-organization create connections for 8 billion people that Scrum Scale cannot do for 625 people. What's wrong with this picture? Right? It's because it's not self-organization. The people are organized. I will organize you. Right? I was once at a conference and having this argument with a young project manager who was getting his team into Agile. Are you doing Agile? Yeah. I mean, our project managers are all making sure that the team of people are doing Agile. You know, we're all managing them. I said, no. You know, this is about self-management, right? Not about management. He said, yeah. I'm self-managing my team. He literally said this. I was just like, did you just hear what you said? All right, so these hierarchies don't work for Agile. Now, they might work, I mean, if everyone is uneducated and if we need immense reliability and immense control. And I mean, there are some waterfall products that have been developed this way, and they work. They do work. Like the space program, a lot of the space program was developed this way. It's just that it's 3 orders of magnitude more expensive than doing things in an Agile way. When I was at the conference in Iași, I mean, I gave some comparisons between Agile and Waterfall. And I mean, I said, here's the cost of the space shuttle. And I mean, it's more zeros than I can remember. It's worse than trillions of dollars. Every week in week 7, all the Danes go to Sweden to go skiing because the Swedes are too chicken to come out in the cold in week 7. They wait until it warms up in March. But the Danes are the real Vikings. You can see I don't wear socks, right? So here I am out in Broaden National Park in Norway, and out on the ski trails. And look off in the distance, and there's a couple of mountains. How far away do you think those mountains are? And they kind of look, I mean, this looks like it's right over the hill, right? It looks like I should be able to walk there in about 10 or 15 minutes. No, this near one is 7 kilometers away, and the far one is 10 kilometers away. But you can't tell. Why can't you tell? There's no telegraph poles, no telephone poles, no roads, no houses. There's nothing by which you can gauge the distance. There's nothing by which I can determine what the scale of this picture is. So if I took this picture and reduced it down 100 times, you might give me the same estimates. Or if I blew up the picture 100 times, you might give me your same estimates. They look the same distance away. This is called a scale-free system. So it doesn't matter how big the scale actually is, that there are properties of the system that remain the same. And that's what we're looking for. Now, Jeff Sutherland of Scrum, he's the inventor of Scrum, used this term for years and years, and I asked him, what do you mean by scale-free system? And he said, well, this means that I can add a team without taking away from the productivity of any team. Well, I can do that by just adding a team and not having them do anything, right? So no, I mean, that is not the definition of a scale-free system. So what I want you to do at the end of this short talk is to understand what a scale-free system is and understand how you can build them in your organization. Now, your organization is pretty smart. Your developers are pretty smart, and they're likely already doing this with self-organization, but a lot of management practices can get in the way and can make these things ineffective. Now, what I want you to do is to be able to nurture these and consciously organize your organization so it's scale-free. So scaling in development is in general a bad idea. Let me start with that. So I mean, don't scale unless you absolutely have to. The costs are phenomenal. There's a 40% loss in capacity in going from one team to two. And you need to double staff to get back where you started. However, scoping is going to expand the span of communication. So this is like having that localization team in Germany. So it ends up being the same problem as scaling. And there's a lot of other traditional organizations that the Scrum trainers never talk about, but with which the Scrum team must interact, like marketing and human resources and management and external plant and security and legal. I mean, these people do real work, and the work they do has implications for the product and for the Scrum team. And so there has to be some kind of organization that reflects how these things work together. And it's not a hierarchy, because hierarchies have this same problem of having these terribly long communication chains through the least common factor of management. So what we want to do instead is to build a scale-free network. I mean, if I increase the number of people in a hierarchy and I try to maintain sanity, well, what does it mean to maintain sanity? I have 5 people on a team. I could just grow a scale-free network by adding people to the team, so the teams are 20 or 40 or 50 people. Well, yeah, but that doesn't work. We all know that, right? And if you find what happens naturally, if you make teams that are that large, they self-organize into sub-teams. How many of you have a team of more than 10 people? Anyone on a team of more than 10 people? I mean, I'm guessing if you look inside of it, it's really multiple sub-teams that are relatively autonomous. I mean, people just can't interact efficiently with that many other people. There's a limit of about 6 in the long term. This is research I did in the 1990s. So when I add people, usually the depth of the hierarchy is going to change. I mean, I can just add another team, but now I'm going to have 20 teams working together. Well, can one person manage 20 teams? Have the same problem. Manager can manage about 6 teams, and their manager can manage about 6 of them. So the hierarchy grows. The number of connections between people grows. It is not scale-free. As I scale it, the behavior and the properties change, and I get more and more delay. So what I want to do is have a scale-free system. Now, the way scale-free systems work is with hubs. So instead of having a hierarchy, I have a network. And it's not hierarchical. This is not about command and control. This is about interaction. So, I mean, if there's some community of interest that needs to interact together, well, great. I'll put a meeting room there for them. Or I'll appoint a facilitator to facilitate the interactions between these people so they can interact with each other. And maybe a person belongs to several of these local hubs. Is that a good thing? Now, the managers will say, no, I need absolute control. And if 2 managers are managing them, then there's a problem. But in Scrum, these hubs are not managers. There are no managers in Scrum. If you have development managers, the first thing you should do on Monday when you get back to work is fire all the managers. Google did this in 2001. Wayne Rossing fired all the managers. I was working with a large, dumb, hierarchical, 150-year-old German company. They hired me back. I met with the CEO and 50 of the managers, and I mean, they were totally dysfunctional. Got a guy excited. They fired all the managers. This was Bosch I.O. This is not some small little snot-nosed startup company. This is a 150-year-old German manufacturing company, and they fired all the managers and they put the control in the hands of Scrum teams. So we're going to get rid of the managers. Teams will be self-managing, and we're going to connect them together in a communication network that may have facilitators. And these local loci of facilitation we call hubs. So they're going to tie together a community of leaves, and maybe they'll tie in a few more hubs. But this is not a hierarchy. It's a network. They tend to be very flat. Now, there's some wonderful metrics in mathematics, in graph theory, and one of them is called graph diameter, which is the maximum distance from any node to any other node in the network. And so an organization with hubs tends to have a small graph diameter. Well, what does that mean? That means that the number of paths between any two people in the organization is very low. That means the communication networks are very well coupled. That means the feedback loops are very fast. Now we have self-organization and feedback. Now we have Agile. We'll talk about this distribution in terms of node degree. So I mean, here are two organizations. So here's kind of a random network, a bunch of nodes, and they're connected together. Maybe this is hierarchical, but I mean, in fact, the connections are random. So, and this is from a PhD thesis from Chile by Carlos Castillo. So, I mean, how many links are there from this node to this node? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So probably the graph diameter is 17 here. Without changing the number of nodes, I can add local or designate some of the nodes as being hubs. Now, these hubs tend to have a large number of connections. So here, I mean, if I look at the nodes, I don't think any node here has more than 4 connections. Maybe even more than 3. Are there any with 4? But here we have a node that has 7 connections. Now, 7 is quite manageable. But most of the nodes are still very weakly connected. So the way that I connect to someone else through the network is through my hub. The graph diameter here, the distance from any node to any node, is a lot lower because these hubs connect the network together. And here, it is still kind of hierarchical. This is a totally directed graph. But what in general is I want a directed acyclic graph that can have multiple paths. Now that's cool because I have multiple paths, I have redundancy, which means if someone is late for work in the morning or someone is busy, there's an alternative path to get the problem solved. So what I can do is for each of these nodes, I can count what's called its node degree. So here is a node with node degree 1. It has 1 connection. Here's another one with node degree 1. Here's another one with node degree 1. Here's one with node degree 7. Here's one with node degree 6. Here's one with node degree 4. And now I can make a histogram that looks at how many nodes do we have of each kind. So if I look at a classical organization, they tend to look like this. Okay? And most people in a real organization will have about 5 connections. Now these are graphs for the pictures on the previous screen. So if I look at that first picture, the average number of connections between 2 nodes is 2. Okay? Or the average connections from a node to other nodes is 2. And it's a normal distribution. This is how organizations tend to form. If I look at that second one, there's a lot that only have 1 connection. They're only connected to their hub. And then I have an exponential decay, and then it goes up. So I don't know how many of you have studied complexity theory, but one of the aspects of complex systems is a lot of the behavior and a lot of the data are in the tails of the distribution. So if you use standard statistical methods with mean and standard deviation, you're missing all the interesting stuff. I mean, the interesting stuff is going on out here. Here's where the coordination is going on. So if you're focusing on the statistically normal parts of the organization, you're missing the effective communication. And sometimes this is extremely subtle. I do organizational studies. I mean, how many of you have Susan working at your company? Susan, she's the gossip. I mean, you always see her standing by someone's office with a cup of coffee, or she's always gossiping or hanging around the water cooler or something. Do you know that she's responsible for 70% of the interorganizational communication in your company? What do you do for her at merit review, right? How many lines of code did you write? Well, it can be really, really, really subtle. This is a very healthy, scaled organization. This is a sick 19th century Bismarck Army hierarchical organization. And when I go in and study organizations, I instrument them and I study what the interactions are between roles. I do this as a consultant, to measure the structure of organizations. And it's largely sociology or anthropology, making sociological models of organizations. So I have data from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of organizations. So this is the normal distribution. This is an exponential distribution, except for this funny thing out here in the tails of the distribution. What just happened? All right, let's try this again. All right, so you all know scale-free networks. Any of you academics, if you can make a tree of paper citations, what papers cite which other papers, that's not a hierarchy. But there is usually one seminal paper that everyone cites in any given domain. That's a hub. And so if you look at graphs of paper citations, they tend to form scale-free networks. Another one is the internet. If you look at how pages refer to each other, I mean, everyone refers to google.com or amazon.com or whatever. But it's not hierarchical. They're hubs that are going to connect together the leaves of an otherwise normally distributed network. And so here's a picture of a scale-free network. I think this is an internet picture. So we know these things. It's not that they're strange. How about in your organization? How many of you are doing a scrum of scrums? Now, is the scrum of scrums on your organizational chart? Is the scrum of scrums on your organizational chart? Then it's not a scrum of scrums. A scrum of scrums is developers who autonomously self-organize to get together to coordinate to solve some problem. They do not have a scrum master. They do not have a product owner. They're self-forming and they're self-managing. This whole notion of scrum of scrums as organizational entities came from, SAFe and Scrum at Scale, because when we're bringing in Scrum, we need a place to put those managers. And so we give them a team called a Scrum of Scrums. And now I have multiple managers, right? I have the manager, I have my product owner, I have my Scrum of Scrums manager, I have my team manager, I have my team lead, I have those chief PO. I mean, pity the poor developers. No. These Scrum of Scrums are self-organizing, and they're flat. There is no Scrum of Scrums. This is ridiculous. This is good old-fashioned hierarchical command and control. So we want this self-organization around these hubs. So why are hubs cool? Because hubs create multiple paths between nodes in the network. So this makes the network very robust. They tend to reduce internode travel distance. So instead of there being 17 links between those two nodes, now maybe there's only 3 or 4. So now I'm closer to small world theory. I'm closer to self-organization. The feedback loops are short, so I can be agile. I can make responsive decisions. And they tend to have redundancy. So if one of them breaks, then there are alternative paths. The downside of scale-free networks is that if you lose a hub, there's a big cost, because that's going to disconnect a lot of nodes in the network. So there's no free lunch here. You have to make sure the hubs are robust. So this is the downside of hubs, is that they have to be reliable. Now, even in society, in your neighborhood, you have hubs. Who are your hubs? Well, your parent-teacher association, you know, where you go and you meet with the other parents for your school. Your local barber or hairdresser. Your local priest. All of these are hubs, and they connect people together in ways that cut across each other, and they provide the fabric of the structure of the culture. And what I want to do is mimic that in software development instead of putting everything into a hierarchy. So I told you I've been doing empirical research on this, you know, for about, wow, 30 years this year. Using techniques from sociology, social network theory, anthropology, social psychology. So here's this distribution. By the way, the tool I use to do this, if any of you have a real computer, you have a Mac, you can get the tool on the Mac store. All right, so here is an enterprise system software organization. Well, what is it? I mean, here's this normal distribution. So they clearly have the traditional hierarchical structure. The most effective software team that's ever been studied and documented is Borland Quattro Pro for Windows. This is the team from which the daily stand-up came in Scrum. So the daily stand-up came into Scrum through my research on this company. And look what's going on here. There's something going on in the tails of this distribution. This is interesting because this is even a small organization. Here is, and I went into this expecting this to be a big, dumb company. This is a very, very old manufacturing company in Denmark. But again, if I look at this, it's largely an exponential decay, and then I've got a couple of these spikes out here. This is a scale-free system. So this is an organization, a very large organization, large company. This is the organization that makes the documentation for water pumps for this company. It's scale-free. I can look at this. So what does scale-free mean? It means there are hubs that tend to tie things together. Here's another picture of one of the organizations I studied, and each one of these is a role in the organization. You know, the guru, Fabian, documentation manager, test manager, developer, team lead. And these lines are the connections between the roles in terms of how they communicate with each other or trade artifacts to get work done. What makes this organization tightly coupled and agile are the hubs that tie it together. If I just remove 3 hubs, the project manager, the developer, and the team lead, it's not an organization anymore. I mean, there's just the connectivity goes way, 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 way down. So you want to identify these hubs. Now, hubs tend to distribute communication evenly. You can use hubs in a bad way too. So we've said, you know, centralized management is bad. You know what's even worse? Is centralized developer. And we can have pictures of these where the developer is in the middle, and the developer is the place where everything gets coordinated. So, and they become overloaded and burn out. I want to distribute the work across the product owner, across this developer, that developer, and so forth. So, I mean, any hotspot in one of these is a bad sign. It's not that the control is necessarily coming top down. That's not the problem. The problem is the distribution of control and the number of paths I need to go through to get to between 2 networks. So even a developer-centric organization may not be good. Here's a very old, this is one of the first XP projects in AT&T. Again, we have this exponential distribution. It's an agile organization. What's this? Scrum at scale. It's a very boring command and control structure. I do not have this, the data in the tails of the distribution. It's purely hierarchical. Now, we already know some examples. I mean, I mentioned the Scrum of Scrums. How many of you have competency groups or birds of a feather? So, all the Java programmers get together in a group or a meeting once a month, or all the database people, or all the UX people. Those are hubs. They cut across the Scrum teams. They're local areas of coordination and communication. So we know these. Alistair Coburn, 30 years ago, was saying that every enterprise ought to have code ownership. But it's temporary code ownership. We're not going to have someone who keeps the code under lock and key, and they're the only person who changes it. But they're going to be the shepherd for that code to make sure that it's well maintained. And we're going to have people who own each feature. Who's responsible for this feature? Instead of just assuming no one is responsible. And in Scrum we say everyone is responsible. What a joke. Anything for which everyone is responsible for, no one is responsible for. So you want a hub, you want a feature owner, you want a component owner. You want someone who is the lightning rod for the interactions on that. How many of you have seen this picture? It's kind of a funny cartoon, right? Is that hubs? Is that hubs? Aha. This is how Google is organized. The rest are also all basic, hierarchies or fully distributed and really not a system. So these things apply at the corporate level, at the enterprise level. Not just down to the Scrum team level. This is how you think about the communication culture and the culture of command and control in your company. And to be agile, you need to be looking like Google. So you can do this at home. Like I say, you can get the tool on the web if you have a Mac. There's this website where you can go get it if you want to do this. A lot of this stuff, you don't need the tool. I'm not here to sell tools. Believe me, I'm not making enough money off this tool except to maybe pay for one good dinner a year in Timisoara. But you can do these things manually as well, and this is mainly a way of thinking and of understanding how to manage your organization. And be thinking about, what is the function of a Scrum of Scrums? What is the function of a birds of a feather group? And so on and so forth. So most scaling frameworks are not scale-free, even though the talking heads will tell you they are. They simply don't understand what the term means. At best, they're hierarchical organizations that are interrupt-driven. Small Scrum works because everyone is connected. I don't need, this notion of a scale-free system, but people become disconnected as they grow, so I need something in place to connect together the leaves. Scale-freeness supports enterprise agility. And Scrum has some facilities for this now that you may not even know you're using. But be more conscious about it and avoid command and control. Fire all the managers. Allow the teams to self-organize, to coordinate, rather than trying to be the Scrum Master or manager who's orchestrating this. And let hubs flourish. Thank you very much.